So, guys, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dolf up onto the stage. You've got literally one of the most recognized guys on the planet who's come all the way to South Africa to share his knowledge with you. So, round of applause for Dolf. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn this on. Well, I'd say thank you, but don't clap now. You don't know if it's going to be any good. And the truth is, I don't know if it's going to be any good. And I ad-lib all these things, as you now know. And what I think we're going to talk about this afternoon is just some aspects of commercial real estate that work really well. But to do that, I want to get into a few topics first. As you know, why is commercial so good? Is anyone interested in that, or do you know that? What do you want me to talk about? Commercial. All right, two of you do. The rest of you are not sure why you're here. You'll just go with the flow. You're here for the coffee and the lunch. Was it good? It sustains you, right? Who ate too much? Come on, be honest. What happens when you eat too much? I don't mean long term, I mean short term. It's hard to stay awake, right? All right, so we'll try and keep you awake. I can tell some of you don't like me already because of this statement. This is just my sneaky way of finding out who's come here on their own, you know. So the fundamental difference between commercial and residential real estate. Well, let's first talk about what is commercial real estate. Because in America, for instance, if you have a multi-family unit, if you have more than 4 homes in one complex, then it is considered commercial for mortgaging purposes, for appraisal purposes, for home inspection purposes. It's ridiculous. I have a much simpler definition of commercial and residential real estate. Residential real estate is real estate where people have their residences, and commercial real estate is where people conduct commerce. Now, we won't get into that grey area where people are conducting commerce in their homes. But what that means is if you have a house, something that always used to be a house, and there's been a zone change, and now it's zoned for light commercial or office space or something, and it's turned into a dentist's premise. Is it residential or commercial? It's a house, remember? It's commercial. It's a commercial lease. There's a commercial operator there. If you have an old warehouse that has been converted to loft apartments, it's now residential. Okay, so that's my definition of it. I'm going to stick by it. The fundamental difference between commercial and residential, philosophically speaking, is that with residential, whether you like it or not, you're dealing essentially with people. I know there are contracts involved, like the residential tenancy agreement and various other documents, but in essence, you're dealing with tenants. They'll call you and say, the toilet's blocked. And you'll say, what on earth are you putting in there? That's the 3rd time this month. And they'll say, none of your stinking business, come and get it fixed. And then you say, okay, well, how about tomorrow at 2 p.m.? And they say, no, that doesn't suit. Thursday at 10 a.m. You have to call the plumber. Does Thursday at 10 suit? No, I'm taking my daughter to a volleyball. And it goes on and on. You're dealing with people. Whereas with commercial, philosophically, you don't deal with people. Even though there are people involved, there are lessees, which is the commercial name for a tenant, and various other people. But you essentially deal with contracts. And a contract is written in black and white. And in general, I prefer contracts to people when it comes to figuring out what's going on, because it's written down, you can both refer to it. All right. So I can tell a lot of you are having trouble focusing on what I'm saying because you're still mad about this. So may I have a show of hands? Who has read this and is inclined to agree with it and be willing to admit it? All right, a few hardy gentlemen. I told you I'd find out who came here on your own. They're obviously here without spouses. And one woman agrees with it, okay. And then who has read it and is inclined to disagree with it? All right. I mean, I personally don't care whether you agree or disagree because I want to make a point with this, but fewer than 10% of you have voted. That is disgusting. Remember this morning when I was giving away money and only 2 people waddled up? I mean, they didn't run. They were sort of, there might be 500 Rand in it for me, but I might embarrass myself. And the rest of you sat there and either thought, what mugs, I'm pleased it's not me, or I wish it was me, or yeah, that sounds like a good deal, right? And I was hoping you'd get a lesson from that, because remember I said, the way you reacted to this little exercise here is probably how you'll react to real deals in real life. Folks, if you want to get things done, you have to take action. Is RJ in the room? No, it's a bit like RJ said. The thing that distinguishes him from other people is he takes massive action. You've got to show more enthusiasm in life, folks. You're sitting there like tranquilized turtles, to be honest. No, you are. And I have a saying that if you catch fire with enthusiasm, people come from miles around to watch you burn. But it's true. But you'll make things happen. And I can go a bit further. I know we don't have all day, but I'm fascinated that simple question, who agrees and who disagrees? And a handful of you voted either way. The rest of you, what are you thinking? Like, get on with the real stuff. We didn't come here for this nonsense. I'm telling you, you'll learn more. That's what you were thinking. Yeah. Well, let me tell you something. The reason you're here, probably amongst others, is you think you're an honest, kind person with integrity. You work hard, and yet somehow your financial situation doesn't reflect the person that you think you are. So you've come to get the facts. And I'm telling you, the thing that's holding a lot of you back from having the financial means that you think you deserve is not the facts. You already know them. You read the books 10 years ago and 5 years ago. You're missing the psychology. And for a lot of you, you're missing participation. You know, I normally write on the board, the only failure in life is the failure to participate. It's true, folks. It's better to try something and fail than not to have tried at all. You know, so I really mean, I think this sort of thing. Did you vote for either of these? Didn't vote because it's not important. I spent, 20 years of my life pursuing things that I thought were the important ones, but they weren't. So I'm trying to give you an insight of that. And I only did a few minutes worth this morning compared with the whole weekend, so I let you off lightly. When you ask a group of 5-year-olds, who's got 5-year-old kids at home, by the way? A few. Who's ever had 5-year-old kids? Okay. And who's ever been a 5-year-old? Okay. Just trying to get engagement here. When you ask them a question, like you say, what color is this, whatever it's called, stick thing? They all shake, all of them, ask me, they're full of enthusiasm, they're all smiling, ask me, and you say, Sally, what color is it? It's yellow. And you say, wrong. Can anyone help Sally out? How would you feel as an adult if you answered one of my questions and I said, wrong, can anyone help this turkey out? You wouldn't be inclined to answer another question, would you? So the teacher says, wrong, can anyone help Sally out? She's still waving her hand. Ask me again, teacher, I know the real answer this time. You can't hold them back. That's why they're always asking questions like, why is the sky blue? And why is the grass green? And is the green that you see is green the same as the green that I see is green? You wouldn't think I had jet lag, would you? But anyway, it's because of the jet lag. And you can't stop them. And now let's fast forward a mere decade. You've got a 15-year-old coming home from school. They walk in the door and say, how was school today? Yeah, all right. What's happened between the ages of 5, ask me, and 15, where they say, yeah, all right? And more particularly, what's happened to the 5-year-old inside each and every one of you, such that when I ask a simple question, a handful of you answer. And you've got to wonder, you don't have to answer me, please don't, but wonder to yourself, could it be that your circumstances are a little bit of reflection of your lack of enthusiasm for living? So, woman without her man is helpless. Watch very carefully. I'm going to do a couple of things to it. The first thing is I'm going to put a colon after the word woman, and the second thing is I'm going to put a comma after the word her. Understanding of what's gone on goes in waves. You'll notice it. I can tell from my perch here that some still haven't got it. That's okay. No, it's true. That's okay. In the next break, say, what was that thing about the man and the woman? Why was everyone laughing? May I have a show of hands? Who agrees with it now? You. Ladies, have I redeemed myself? And who now disagrees with it? The same who agreed with it before, right? You know, I once did this in Fiji. We had 1,200 people in the room, and it was before we had all this computerized stuff. So I had it on a massive flip chart. A woman without her man is helpless. And before we got started, it was after lunch, so this woman stormed up on stage and tore the sheet down and threw it on the ground and stood on it, And then she wrote, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. So we went through with the whole thing, and I wrote it again, and I went through my debriefing. I put the colon and the comma, and this is the point I'm trying to make. But I said to the lady, what was your point? What's your comeback? What's your modification to yours? Well, she didn't have one. You see, you can hold bitterness within you, or you can do something about it. So my point, of course, is if I can put 3 dots on the screen and completely change the meaning of the sentence, do you think it's possible that if in the next hour or so I can put, metaphorically, 3 dots somewhere in your mind, it could completely change the way you see commercial real estate? Is that worth trying? That's sort of the point behind this. You know, everyone's posting now. Scott was posting to, was it Facebook while we were doing this stuff? And everyone posts. So there's a saying, practice what you post. And it's a good thing to tell people, right? Don't just post it, actually practice it. And it's a variation for those of us older than the smartphone age of practice what you preach. We've all heard of that, right? Well, I see nothing wrong with the concept of practice what you preach, but I think it's the wrong way around. It's totally wrong. You get all these gurus on real estate teaching people how to do it, but have they done any deals? It's a good question to ask someone. That's why we're so adamant about sharing how many deals we've collectively done, because surely, at the very least, that's got to make you think, well, at least they've done a few. Right? So I don't think it should be practice what you preach. My version is preach what you practice. Don't become a speaker and then justify being a speaker by doing what you're talking about. Don't practice what you preach. Only become a speaker if you've put in, as Malcolm Gladwell would say, 10,000 hours of training in that area so that you've earned the right to share information on it. So that's the first thing I'll do. And your message starts when your presentation ends, and we've all touched on that today, but I don't care whether you like me, folks. I'm not here to impress you. I care that when this day's over, you'll have learned something that you didn't know, and hopefully take action. Hopefully become someone who makes things happen. Hopefully catch fire with enthusiasm. And hopefully when an agent says to you, well, here's the deal, it's 50% off its normal price, will you do it? You don't sit there like a tranquilized turtle saying, it's a pretty good deal. I should do it. And then 3 weeks later, too late again, too late. You know, you've got to take action. How many of you saw the blood red moon? Could you see it from South Africa about a month ago? You couldn't see it? Well, you're all let off the hook. I haven't found a single person in America who looked at it yet. I'm sure some did. But they're few and far between. We're going to have 4 in the next 18 months. We had the first one, there are 3 more. The one we had last month was the first one in 300 years. Here are opportunities, folks. And now you had to stay up till after midnight to see it. And these are photos I took myself with a little point and shoot. It wasn't through a pair of binoculars. It wasn't even through a telescope. Just astounding. And my camera wasn't good enough and the lights on the screen are hopeless so that you can't see the red. But when it was fully covered, the full eclipse, it was actually red. My point is there are opportunities. You've just got to take them. And this is Trump there. He's the one I've done all these products with. You know, this is called the Wealth Builder's Blueprint. He asked 7 people to talk on 7 topics. I was honored to talk about real estate. There it is there. Money while you sleep. Who said that before? Joseph, you did. You in the room? He was. Where, you know, he likes it that when you wake up in the morning, there's more money in your account than when you went to sleep the night before. I love that. What's that? Oh, IJ, that's right. I love that. I love that. You get addicted to it. I mean, if you're going to get addicted to wholesome things. So we've done a lot of other products together, and I was on the faculty of Trump University for a while. I teach at Wealth Mastery. I think most of you know that. Jim Rohn, did anyone ever have the pleasure of meeting Jim Rohn? I said have, because he passed away a couple of years ago, very sad. And there's Robert Allen and Brian Tracy and myself holding each other's books, and I've been a professor at UNT, and here's Real Estate Riches, and I've got, that's been translated into I don't know how many languages. And here's the Japanese ones, and 52 homes in 52 weeks. We can talk on a bunch of books. By the way, we have samples of some of the products there because Neil has a number of products here in South Africa, and some have been asking me, where can we get this? At the back, there's a table. You can see the products. There's an order form, and they've got limited stocks here, but it means that you can order them and get them delivered relatively quickly rather than ordering them online and having them sent from the States at great expense and great time delay. And this is my book on commercial real estate, which is what I want to talk about now. So I like residential. I got started in residential real estate. There's nothing wrong with it. And I endorse what RJ's doing. You know, we bring a lot of people over. I've written, it's actually 15 books. I don't know if the 16th one, Scott, is this prediction of one we're working on or something, but it's optimistic. But 14 of the 15 have been on residential. Does that prove that I love residential better than commercial by a ratio of 14:1? No, it doesn't prove anything, does it? It could be that there's a bigger market for residential. Or it took me a number of years after I'd written a few books to realize how good commercial was. So it's not as if I thought residential was good, and now I don't, and now I'm saying don't do it, do commercial. I'm not speaking against what IJ had to share. It's all good information. There are valid reasons why people always tend to get started in residential. But I want to share some of the things why I think commercial is so much better. So let's just go through some of the scenarios. Why is commercial better? Well, let's talk first about lease length. IJ talks about getting 3-year residential leases. Do you get those here in South Africa? What's the typical initial lease length? A year. Around the world, that is universally about the maximum, if you're lucky. You certainly don't get 5 years. You certainly don't get 20 years. Neither party would want to commit. Whereas with commercial, it is normal to get long-term leases. In the City of London, you get 25-year leases. On Wall Street, 10, 15 years. And the most common question I get from my commercial tenants is, may we please get an extension on the lease? So we'll get a phone call, please may we extend the lease? And I'll look it up and I'll say, but you've still got 4 years to run. And they say, yes, so can we get a 5-year extension? Why would they want a 5-year extension on a lease? It was touched on earlier today, folks. Because the tenants know where they are. If you've been going to that orthopedic surgeon for 5 years or whatever, you don't have to find their new address. They've built up what's called goodwill, and people pay for that. Even if the tenant wants to sell his or her business, they still want a long-term lease. That's why they'll often say, I'm looking at selling my business. Can I get an extension on the lease? Because if you've got 3 months to run on the lease, you can't get much for your business. But if you've got 3 months plus another 5 years, you can sell it for a good figure. So is this good or bad for the commercial landlord? It's hard. They want long-term leases. So that's point number one, lease length. Let's talk about outgoings. Outgoings are the costs. Costs like rates, insurance, maintenance. On residential property, the landlord tends to pay them, right? You collect rent from your tenants, but it's your responsibility to pay those outgoings. On commercial properties, almost without exception, the tenant pays the outgoings. Is this good or bad? Well, it depends on whether you're the tenant or not. But let's be blunt, folks. You pay it as a tenant anyway. If you don't pay it directly to the council and the insurance company, then you pay a higher rent to compensate. But it's so much easier for you as a landlord if you can pass those costs right on. So all our tenants pay by automatic bank transfer. You all know what that means, no different terminology. And in fact, we get them to make 2 transfers a month. One is for the rent, and one is for the costs. It's a combination of the predicted next 12 months cost divided by 12 of rates, insurance, and maintenance. Because then if ever the council changes the rates or the insurance company changes the insurance premiums, you get them to adjust that automatic payment, and they know you haven't fiddled with the rent, because the rent is only supposed to change at rent reviews. Notice when I say that rent only changes at rent reviews, I'm going up, not down. That brings me to a third thing. And I'm going to talk about the ratchet clause. Notice that ratchet is one word. Some people, when they hear ratchet, they think it's 2 words. It's 1 word. It's ratchet. Because the rent, some of you are wondering, what's he talking about? The rent can be ratcheted up, but not down. Sometimes it's called an upwards only rent review. Is it fair that the rent should be able to go up in good times, but not come down in bad times? You don't know, do you? On the surface, you might think, well, that seems a bit slanted in favor of the landlord. But in actual fact, it's very fair, because by having upwards only rent reviews, commercial tenants can charge a lower base rent than what they would otherwise have to charge to allow for short-term fluctuations in the rental market. And by offering a lower base rental, what it means is the commercial market tends to be far more stable than the residential market. You think of the global financial downturn, right? The first 1, 2, 3 years of it, people were still into a 5-year lease. They couldn't say, well, I'm out of here. If they went bankrupt, they wouldn't pay the rent, of course, but they were committed through the lease agreement to paying. So if it's a short-term crisis, like 1 or 2 years, the residential market will reflect that. Rents have gone down because the landlord across the road has said, I'm going to knock 1,000 rand off the rent. But you can't do that in commercial. So it tends to be far more stable. Can you think of any other advantages, or are there only these 3? Oh, come on, there are dozens and dozens of them. The tenants tend to earn their income on the premises, right? You don't all have to agree, but 1 or 2 would be nice. They all earn their income there, so they have a vested interest in keeping the place looking good. Now, the lease contract, remember, they have to conform to it. It says that before the tenant is allowed to make any significant changes, he has to get the approval of the landlord. So I'll get a phone call and say, hey, I'm thinking of tearing down the front wall of my big retail complex. Do I have your permission to do that? And I said, well, not really. That would make it quite drafty. And I said, well, then I want to replace it with this glass curtain to allow more light on and be very modern and all that. Do you give permission for that? Of course. All right, so they earn the income. They're always doing things to make it look good. They're painting it, they're sprucing it up, putting new signs on, doing all kinds of things. Another one here, and these are in no particular order. The tenant doesn't always pay. I'll put tenant pays with a question mark, because normally he'll pay for it, right? But my leases also have a clause, and most commercial leases do, that if the tenant asks the landlord to pay for a modification and the landlord agrees, then the tenant shall pay extra rent in the form of X% of the cost of the modification. So in the case of this tenant who wanted a new glass wall, he said, I want to pull down the front of the building. I said, no. He said, I want to replace it with a glass wall. I said, sure, that's good. I said, how much? He said, it's going to cost about 100,000. I said, you absolutely have my permission. I'll give it to you in writing. He said, well, one more thing. I was wondering if you'd mind paying for it. What's your initial reaction, folks? Pardon? Get lost. Get lost. Right, initial reaction is get lost. Would you think I'm a stark raving idiot? Why would I pay 100 grand for something? All right, but think about it for a moment. So I'll give you the actual example. This was when interest rates were a bit higher. They were around 8%. And when the lease was drawn up, his improvements percentage, the percentage he'd pay me in extra rent, was 12% of the cost of making that improvement. Okay? So he wanted me to spend the 100,000, but I'd collect an extra 12,000 in rent. That's a 12% return on my investment. Is that good or bad? That's pretty good, isn't it? And it gets even better than that, because part of that 100,000 could be claimed, and well, you don't have depreciation here, but in everywhere else in the world where we do, part of it could be claimed as a repair because the old wall was pretty dilapidated. So 20,000 was a repair. You can deduct that off your income at 33% roughly. It only cost me 14,000, not 20,000. And the remaining 80,000, the cost of that wall, could be depreciated at about 3% a year. 3% of 80 is about 2,400. I didn't pay tax on that. So it didn't cost me 100 net. It only cost me about 90,000. You're with me, kind of. So it only cost me 90,000, but I was still collecting 12,000. So my return was about 14.5%, 15%. Is that good or bad? It's good. It's getting better, isn't it? Do you want to know how it can be even better? 2 of you do. See me afterwards. Gosh, folks, is it lunch or what? Or is this not exciting enough? I've just created like thousands of dollars out of nothing. Okay. So you get a valuer in, because when you spend 100,000 on a building, by how much does the building have to go up by? By definition, this is in every textbook, it's pretty obvious. How much? 100,000. You fools, you're just buying into my patter. There's no correlation between what you spend and how much it goes up by. If you spend $1 million drilling a 1 kilometer hole in your backyard, it's not going to increase the value by $1 million. In fact, it will decrease it because kids may fall into it. So in general, when you spend 100,000 putting in this beautiful new glass wall on a retail premise to allow light and all that, the value goes up by more than 100,000. Proof of that is my book. I haven't got one here to show. It's the longest title on Amazon. There's a copy down the back. It's called 101 Ways to Massively Increase the Value of Your Real Estate Without Spending Much Money. Was it easy to come up with 101 ways? It was tough. It was tough to limit it to 101. There were so many. You've got to get more creative, folks. You've got to start thinking outside of the box. You do, I can tell. So, I got the valuer in, and the value went up by 200,000. So then I went to the bank and I said, Mr. Bank Manager, I know that as a banker you're very conservative and negative and you don't really like lending money, even though that's how you make your money. So I know you're not going to lend me much on this 200,000 increase in equity. But I do have an appraiser, a registered valuation for 200,000. Will you give me a modest 50% on it? And he'll say, oh, I think we could manage that. So he gives you the 100,000 that you spent putting up the wall. How much has it cost you so far? In capital outlay terms? Zero. Now, back then interest rates were about 8%. I understand here they still are. So 8%, I was collecting 12%. So you have a choice. You pay for it yourself and you get 12,000 extra a year on a 90,000 after-tax investment. Or you don't put any cash into it at all. You borrow it from the bank, it's going to cost you 8,000 a year, but now you're getting 12,000 a year. So on no capital outlay, you're making 4,000 a year. Does that excite you?
Yeah.
Good. Well, one person's caught the bug. Okay, we're getting there. It's going to be a long afternoon. Guys, I think this is so hot. Which other investment can you get where you don't have to spend any extra money and you can get 12 coming in, 8 going out? But not only have you got that extra 4,000 net income, your collateral has gone up. Your equity has gone up, your net worth has gone up, your cash flow has gone up, your tax deductibility has gone up, and most importantly of all, your tenant appreciation has gone through the roof. Because he's now going to say to his buddy that's looking at starting a building, see what Dolf's got, you got to become one of his tenants. I just asked him to spend 100 grand on my place, and the city fool agreed to it. It's so simple, folks. So there are so many things you can do with commercial. We can rattle through a whole lot more. If you have a house and you've got a 1-year lease and the tenant says, I've just got a new job in Cape Town, I really want to go. Will you please let me out of the lease? What are you going to say? You guys just don't know, do you? You have no idea. Did you understand the question?
Yes.
What's that? Oh, even if you've got a year lease, they only have to give you 20 days. That's not a year's lease, that's a 20-day lease. Unbelievable. Okay. But even if you don't agree to it, they could just leave. Are you going to pursue them down in Cape Town? Was I speaking too fast, sir? I'm nearly finished. The next speaker's really good. Gosh, man. Now I'm not going to be invited back. No, he came to the wrong event, the poor bugger. Totally forgotten where I was, but never mind. Oh, so you're not going to go down to Cape Town to pursue him. What if he says, listen, I have to go to Cape Town to get this new job, but I found a buddy who's willing to take over my lease. What will you say? Yes, we'll take him on. So Fred Smith comes in as the replacement tenant. And after 2 months, Fred Smith disappears. Can you legally go to your ex-tenant down in Cape Town and say, hey, Fred's gone, was your buddy, you now owe me the rent again? You can't do that, can you? On commercial leases, if a tenant sells their business, they have to get an assignment of lease documents signed by themselves, the incoming tenant, and you as landlord, and you have the right to approve them or not. All right, so you can decide whether you want them in. So they submit their financials and all that. And what it means is, in this document, everyone agrees that if the incoming tenant, the buyer of the business, does not pay the rent, then the outgoing tenant, the seller, will pay it for you. I mean, will pay you the rent. Is that hot? Yes. I think it's great. And everyone agrees it's standard form, so it's called an assignment of lease document. I won't write it down because the remaining ideas I've got will take more than that on the page. I think this is hot, folks. This is great. I had a lowly fish and chip shop. I shouldn't say lowly, but it was a mere fish and chip shop. The lease duration was only 2 years. And yet in that single 2-year period, I had 5 assignments of lease. The business kept on being sold up and up for 30,000, then 40,000, 45, kept on climbing. That means I had 6 people lined up in a line, kind of literally, waiting to pay me the rent. We never skipped a minute of rent on that building. So these are things you can do with commercial that you can't do with residential. All right, so lots of advantages. Are you starting to get excited about commercial? Yes. Some of you are, good. But let's look at the cons. What are the disadvantages? I only know of 2, and even though people always say, oh no, there are dozens, they always come down to these 2. So, what was that first one you had, sir? What capital?
Startup capital.
Startup capital. You need more money to buy commercial than residential because banks will offer you a lower, what do you call it here? It's LTV or LVR, what do you call it? Loan to value. Yeah, sometimes it's called LVR, loan to value ratio, so I just want to get it right. So lower LVR. So let's give it some numbers. In South Africa, you can normally get an 85-90% mortgage on residential, true or not? Is that good or bad? It's pretty good, isn't it? Could you ever get 100% here? Yes. Could you get more than 100? Yes. That's illegal, isn't it? No, it's not illegal. Don't buy into it. I was in the Netherlands in the 70s when they were offering mortgages at 125%. Because you, the poor buyer, had to get psychologically used to living in this new place, so you had to redecorate it to suit your devices and have a vacation to get used to living in a new suburb, blah, blah, blah. And they didn't mind because you spent a lot of the money on the house and the value went up, the collateral went up, so the bank was still covered. So let's talk about 90%. And what typically will they offer you on commercial? 70.
If you're an A grade fund.
A grade. I don't know if I'd be A grade, but anyway. So 90% versus 70 is typically right. So that's one negative thing of commercial. Can you think of any others? Say that again. The business goes bad. So you lose the tenant. So how do you get a replacement tenant? Is that what we're really saying it is? All right, so I'm going to put here difficult to get tenant. All right, because that's what it boils down to. And that's the biggest fear people have with commercial. They've seen a commercial place vacant for 3 months and think, oh my gosh, am I ever pleased I don't own that building? But if you have a house that's vacant, what's the only problem if your house has been vacant for 3 months? Is it that the color of the carpet in the spare bedroom is the wrong shade of green?
The rent's too high.
The rent's too high. It absolutely. Drop it by 500, 1,000 rand per week or month or whatever it is, and you'll find a tenant. Would you all agree? Yes. Whereas with commercial, you can be stuck with a price. Is this kind of hitting the mic? I don't know how long we've got. Like we've got a little bit more, right? Because I'll keep going on this because this kind of gets to an interesting phase. So would you agree that if I can overcome this problem of the lower loan-to-value ratio and overcome the problem of the perceived difficulty of getting a tenant, that we've eliminated all of the disadvantages of commercial, and we're still left with all these advantages of commercial? Would you agree with that? All right, well then let's get started. To do that, I'm going to show you the one universal formula that applies to residential property. Now, I'm always amused when I look at books that other people write, and by the way, I'm a voracious reader. I'm not encouraging you to read my books. I don't care which books you read. I just care that you read. Read any book on real estate. I don't think there's such a thing as a bad book on real estate. Because if you spend 300 Rand and 3 hours of your life absorbing that book, and you only get one idea from that book, that one idea could be worth 10,000 Rand a month to you. It could be worth 10,000 Rand a day. If I speak fast enough, I'll be able to show you how you can turn $20 into $2 million overnight. Really, I mean, we've done this. So, residential. Here's the overriding formula. So all these books that I read, they have complex form, pages and pages of formula to impress the reader. Because most people have an ego. And you're either a slave to your own ego or you honor some higher purpose or whatever. So if you have an ego, you want to impress people with stuff like big formulas. So here's the only formula you need to know for residential, kind of. And that's that the return on a residential property equals, what do you think it equals? The rent divided by something. The price of eggs? The cost of eggs? The mortgage? The return you get on your residential property equals the rent divided by the purchase price. Now, are we talking pre-tax rent or post-tax rent or pre-depreciation after, and what about cost? But in essence, whichever one it is, it's rent. It could be the pre-tax return or the after-tax return or after-depreciation return. It's rent divided by the purchase price. All agree with that? Okay. What determines the rent? Can you just say, well, I want to get 20,000 Rand for that house. That's the price on it. Can you say that? No. I mean, you could, but it wouldn't work, right? So what determines the rent on a house? The market, absolutely. It's driven by market forces. And what determines the purchase price of that property? The market rate. You can't charge double the market price. Now, does that mean you can get bargains in an open market? Of course, because real estate, unlike the stock market, which is very efficient, is very inefficient. So you can drive around the suburb, and especially if it's what we call a FSBO, a for sale by owner. This owner might think, why would I pay some snooty-nosed young upstart real estate agent 3% of my property when he doesn't even live in this? I've lived there for 20 years. I know what it's worth. So he'll sell it for, I don't know, 8 million Rand when it's worth 14 million. And he's saved the 3%, but it's cost him 6 million. All right, that happens a lot. So you might pick up that bargain at a 6 million discount. But in general, the rent's determined by the market. The purchase price is determined by the market. A 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, certain age, size, condition, views, susceptibility to wind and all that, will sell for about the same price as a similar sized house with a similar number of bathrooms, view, susceptibility to wind, blah, blah, blah. That means your return is determined by the market. Would you agree? It has to be. These two are, that one is. That's why you can go into a market and say, well, currently in Atlanta returns are 8.2%, or currently returns are this or that. Nothing right or wrong about that. So you've got that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to compare that with the situation on commercial. Can you read the green as well? Okay. With commercial, it's slightly different. Here we say that the value of a commercial property equals the rent divided by, and I don't expect you to know this off by heart yet, but I'm going to write it down, the cap rate in commercial property. The value of a property, the capital value, equals the rent divided by the cap rate. What's the cap rate? It's short for capitalization rate. It's the rate at which you capitalize the rental to arrive at the capital value. That's the definition of it. If you don't fully understand it, that's acceptable, because most agents don't. They'll say, well, this building's selling at a cap rate of 5%. What they really mean is this building is selling at a return of 5%. But by obfuscating the issue, they hide the fact that in addition to the return on that building, there might be a market cap rate. Right, I know you're a bit confused, that's okay. So let's put some numbers to it. Let's say that the rental income is $1 million per annum. Commercial rentals are usually done on an annual basis. And let's say that cap rates are 10%. What that means is for an investor to buy this rental income stream of $1 million, he wants to see a 10% return. What would he be willing to pay for this rental income stream to get 10%? 10 million, right? So if it's a $1 million income stream with 10% cap rate, the value of that building is 10 million. That is what investors will be willing to pay. So I can spend hours just on this, but we'll go forward a bit here and say, what determines the cap rate on a commercial building? Well, I'll tell you, by definition, it's the average returns that similar buildings have sold for in the recent past. So if in the center of Johannesburg, some of the Skyrate, if they've been selling at cap rates of 9%, meaning investors want a 9% return, slightly lower return, which means they're willing to pay more cash for it because the economy is improving. If every other building has been selling at 9%, then that is the cap rate for downtown Joburg for A grade or B grade buildings. So it's determined by the market, right? But what determines the rental on commercial property?
the skills.
Of whom?
The landlord.
Right, you guys, some of you are getting close to it, right? Others are saying, huh? I understood the residential one, but this commercial one, cap rate's a bit fuzzy. So let me explain it. The rent is determined by your creativity. So let me give you a practical example, one I really did. I might have a photo of it in a minute. There was a funeral parlor. Do you know what goes on inside a funeral parlor? They process there, like every factory processes or creates something. Here they process bodies, human bodies. Right, so there's a slumber room and a viewing room and a chilling room. Do I need to explain what they chill in the chilling room? It had been vacant for 3 years because no one could get a tenant, no one knew what to do with it. How did they try to get a tenant? Every Saturday they put an ad in the classified column, and every Wednesday too, because that was a real estate day. Couldn't get a tenant. What would you have done? Pardon?
Start a butchery.
Start a butchery. That is sick. I've heard of start a restaurant, and then my comeback is, well, I hope it's vegetarian. Here's what I did. I employed a person at $8 an hour, which was the going rate back then, to phone every funeral director starting nearby and going out roughly in concentric circles further and further, asking, hey, there is a funeral parlor building available. Do you want to run part of your operation there? Well, most people said, no, don't ever bother me again, don't solicit me, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of day 2, when I was 16 hours into paying her $8 an hour, according to me, that's $128, and get this, it's tax deductible. We found a guy who said, yes, I've always wanted to operate there. When can I have a look at it? So I said to him, well, sir, it's for sale. Why don't you go and see if you want to buy it? Why would I offer it to him for sale when I'm the one who wants to buy it? You have no idea, do you? Or you do, but you just... Because the last thing I want is a tenant who begrudges the fact that the only reason I'm his landlord is I beat him to it. But he replied, as I fully expect him to, said, but I don't want to own property. I want to run funerals. I want someone else to buy the building for me. Can you see how psychologically this is a much better situation than I beat you to it, you slowpoke? So I said, well, go and have a look at it and then tell me what you think. So he looked at it, he liked it. I said, well, here's the deal. If you sign up a heads of agreement where subject to me buying it, you will become the tenant, then I'm willing to explore buying the building. Well, we had to figure out how much rental for this and all that sort of thing. Oh, and talk about these advantages here. The first one was lease length, remember? I thought, I wonder how long a lease I should go for. I wanted a long lease length, right? What would you have suggested?
10 years.
3 years, 10 years? I thought I'd be happy with 5. But in my book, Real Estate Riches, one of my golden rules is never be the first to name a figure, because that person always loses. So I would have been happy with 5. And I said, how long a lease length would you want? And he said, listen here, Sonny Jim, I won't look at it unless you give me 20 years. I said, we can talk. No negotiating needed. So anyway, to keep the story short, we went ahead and bought it. It was worth more to me than to the seller? Yes. Of course it was. I mean, I won't write the figures up. But I ended up buying it for 170. He was paying 30,000 a year in rent. All right. Now, remember, when you go to a bank, because one of your problems is a low loan-to-value ratio. So we're overcoming... Have you noticed I've overcome a couple of our problems? Firstly, difficult to get a tenant. Notice I didn't start off crying in my soup thinking, oh my gosh, I've got an empty building. I didn't own an empty building. It's never been empty in one day that I've owned it, and I still own it, I think. Difficult to get a tenant. I found a building that was empty, and I employed someone, didn't even do it myself, to phone every target person to say, hey, do you want to operate here? And 20 or 30 said, are you kidding? Stop bugging me. And one said, yes, please, but I'll only do it if you give me 20 years. So that's one way of finding a tenant. I'll explore a few more. But now we've got this problem of the lower loan to value, because you know that banks accept, pardon me, the lesser of, pardon me, they accept the lesser of the purchase price or the registered valuation. How do you overcome that one? Well, you get creative. If you go to the bank and say, cap in hand, please, Mr. Bank Manager, will you condescend the bank and your entire family by considering me an unworthy person for this loan? I probably can't afford it because it is a dying business after all, the funeral car business. In fact, his business is going under. Would you condescend yourself to consider me for a loan maybe? And I know you'll probably say no, so in case you change your mind, call me. You're not going to get the loan, folks. But if you go in there and say, oh my gosh, I've just found this hot property. I'm going to buy it, I just don't know which bank's going to fund it. And I know, Mr. Bank Manager, that you are these really conservative, archetypical, slow people who want really conservative valuations. And even the values you send in are really decrepit, old, low valuing people. I know you accept the lesser of the purchase price or the registered valuation. But Mr. Bank Manager, since acquiring this building, I found a tenant at $30,000 a year. It's got to be worth more than I paid for it. And they said, well, we'll see about that. So anyway, they went and appraised this building and came up with an ultra-conservative appraisal of $240,000. Is that good or bad? Well, it was way below what it should have been. Within a year, by the way, they reappraised it with no change in rental at $300,000, which is where it should have been. But they said $240,000, and you're right, they only gave me a 62 or 63% mortgage. 63% of $240,000 was $160,000. I paid $170,000 for it. How much cash did I have tied up in it? $10,000. So here's a question I want to pose for all of you. I won't ask you to answer because I wouldn't get an answer for this one anyway, but I'm going to pose it philosophically. Is my return the $30,000 of income divided by the $170,000 purchase price, which is about 17%? Or is my return $30,000 of rental income minus about 15 for more, so 15 net on a $10,000 cash investment, 150% a year? Well, the answer is yes to both of them. Both are accurate returns based on how you define them. But in my mind, I can say I was getting 150% of what I put into that building every year. And with increases in values and rentals and all that, I mean, I now pull more out of that building, I think, than it cost. So that's one way of getting a tenant. I'll give you another example. Collectively, we've done this crowdfunding thing. We own a warehouse. It's a boring, decrepit, old, ugly, cold warehouse in a sea of similar old vacant warehouses. No one can get a tenant. How will we get a tenant? And I know exactly what you're going to say, and you'd be right too. You'd call me and say, all right, we've got a thorny one. To me, this is not even a challenge anymore. This is trivial. So I commit to spending $10,000. How much? The enthusiasm level is just unbelievably under the carpet. So not even a carpet here, that explains it. Yes, no more than 10,000. I'd like to spend more, but it's tough on the things I need to buy because prices keep coming down. So I replace the bare concrete or the worn linoleum with commercial grade carpet. But like I just said before, spend a bit extra. I've never heard of 8-pound, whatever they called it, but I presume it's a spongy underfelt or something. And you put in beautiful carpet. Get rid of those fluorescent tubes that hum and all that. And don't just put in CFLs, put in LED lighting. Get rid of the door locks and put in electronic locks so he can never leave his keys behind or forget them or lose them or something. Get rid of the single glazed or paned windows and replace them not with dual or double but with triple paned windows. It keeps the industrial noise out, it keeps the cold out in the winter and the heat out in the summer. Put a coffee machine in there and have it percolating in case he likes the smell of coffee. I think we talked about that before today too. Put in a 50-inch LCD screen and tell him it's good for watching corporate training videos. And we know he's not going to watch corporate training videos on this thing, but we've given him a line to use when he tells head office why he's leased this building. And then put in 16 security cameras inside and outside the building so he can monitor the performance of the staff and check for pilfering and all that, and check the security of the building outside, and then put in a little mini bar fridge for keeping cool the drinks that you use every Friday afternoon for end of week celebrations. Are you starting to get a picture of this? You can't spend $10,000 doing this. So here's the manager who's figuring out which warehouse they're going to lease, and he's already looked at 11 that day. Yours is the 12th. And he walks inside, and well, this is a pretty ugly one too. And he gets to the manager's office, and he opens the door, and he looks inside. And whether he likes it or not, and whether you like it or not, subconsciously he's going to think to himself when he peers inside and smells the coffee and sees the TV screen, and that, holy smoke, if I commit to leasing this building, this is where I'm going to park myself for 8 hours a day for God knows how many years to come. He says, I'll take it. And he hasn't even asked the rent. Do you see what I'm saying? To me, this difficulty of getting a tenant, not only is it not a problem, I love it. It keeps my competition at bay. The medical facility over in what's the city again, Atlanta? It's got vacancies, like 11%. It's not even all that much. They're doing nothing to attract a tenant. Nothing. To me, that is just, it's delightful. It's like, well, that's all right. We'll mop up. It's easy. Does that make sense? Any questions on this? No? All right, well, thank you very much.
How do you deal with commercial in South Africa where your supermarkets, basically, there are 3 main supermarkets?
You've got competition from the aeroplane, I'm sorry. In South Africa, supermarkets?
We've got 3 main supermarkets, and traditionally people want a retail outlet to be anchored by a supermarket, and they screw you to below chilling level with the rental, because they say, we're the people who draw people into the centre. Do you encounter that overseas?
Of course, if they're a big anchor tenant. So the question is, you have a big supermarket complex. Why would you build supermarkets? Because people are going to order stuff online before long and have it delivered home. You won't even have to order it before long. We're already buying fridges which monitor the consumption of your vitals, your milk, your butter, all that sort of thing. And when it sees that the fridge is low, it orders it and it gets delivered. The next thing is that it shoots in the door that it just goes into the... No, if you stay in nice hotels, you stay in a Mandarin in Bangkok, you have this little cubbyhole door that you put your shoes in, and there's another door on the outside, and they take the shoes out, and in the morning they're nicely polished. I mean, this stuff's happening. You're either at the cutting edge or the trailing edge, and you decide which one. So yes, it will happen, but I would say if you're going to do a supermarket, then yes, allow an anchor tenant to come in on a lower base rental to attract the other ones, and the other tenants will come if there's that main anchor tenant there. And sorry.
What type of commercial would you recommend besides the medical link? Because you clearly don't like supermarket retail.
Look, there's no category that I'd say only do these. Each to his own. It depends on supply and demand. The question was which category of commercial would I recommend? But you've got to read more. If we read too little, readers are leaders, or another way of putting it is, he who does not read has no advantage over he who cannot read. Meaning if you don't read, you might as well be illiterate. And there are billions of people who can't read. No, I said illiterate. There are billions who can't read, and what a blessing that we can read, and yet we squander our lives watching soaps on TV. So keep up with the trends. For instance, a major trend that's happened in the last decades is everything used to go by sea. People traveled by boat, and we had ports, right? Port authorities and ports where all the containers came in. And as air transportation became cheaper and more affordable, now a lot of freight is done by air. It's cheaper, it doesn't heat up on the 6-week journey across the Pacific or something. No containers fall into the sea, all that sort of stuff. It's much faster, there's less time that all that capital is tied up at sea. So we even talk about airports, we just think of the name airport as a word, but it's an airport. It's like a port for air. It's like, the name skyscraper, but in Dutch we talk about cloud scratchers. And, in some cities you've got pollution pokers or whatever, because, and it becomes a generic term after a while. So if you have commercial premises by an airport, because airports are getting busier and busier. I mean, look at Atlanta's airport. It's just grown phenomenally. It's become #1 in a relatively short space of time. If you have commercial premises near an airport, they'll be in higher than average demand than commercial premises not near an airport. Does that make sense? Storage facilities, depending on economies, are very popular. I built hangars at an airport in Australia that no one's heard of. It's called Jandakot. It's the busiest airport in the country, and no one's heard of it. It's not Sydney's Kingford Smith or Perth International. It's not far from Perth, but it's where a lot of airlines do their training. East China Airlines and Garuda, and lots of airlines train there, and the Royal Australian Flying Doctor Service has its airbase headquarters there. They have 400,000 takeoffs and landings every year. So I built hangars there. But then I did something to my hangars which enabled me to get tenants easily, and it increased my appraisal, my valuation, so that even getting a 50% loan, it paid for the entire construction cost. And that is, I spent a one-off $200 and then $50 a month to get double the rental of my competition. Do you want to know how I did it? Yes. I do it in this book. I mean, I explain it in this book. I tell it at events. Still no one does it. What do you store inside an aircraft hangar? Do you store old tax records there? No. Do you store accounting records? Old clothes? What do you store there? An $8 million Gulfstream 3 or a $12 million Learjet. And the owners of those jets want to know that their babies are safe. So for my $200, I buy an IP camera, an internet camera. It's a camera that you plug into the internet. You know them? You can tunnel in from your smartphone or your tablet or whatever and see what's going on there. And then I put a thermometer, a hydrometer, and a barometer there. And these cameras have tilt and pan. You can pan them around, you can tilt them up and down. So bzzz, you can look at the temperature and the air pressure and the humidity. And then you can look to see that his plane's there. It's programmed such that if a light comes on or someone's walking there or a hangar door opens, it takes a photo and emails it and texts it to the owner of the aircraft. And for that I get double the rental. Is that a good deal? Yes. No one thinks of doing that. All right, so it's just, I believe we've cracked ways of overcoming both of these things. When you know how to do it, it becomes a game. And it's relatively easy to get a tenant. Just talk with them. What would it take for you to move in here? All right, I'll tell you the $22 to $2 million thing. So Jakarta is the capital of which country? Do you know that Indonesia is the most populous nation in the southern hemisphere? No? Do you know that there are more dollar millionaires in Indonesia than there are people in Australia? And yet all over the world, including America, when people think of going down under, they think of going to Australia rather than Indonesia. The economy of Walmart in America is bigger than the economy of all of Australia. Isn't that astounding? And yet every American dreams and thinks of going to Australia. And I love it there. There's nothing wrong with Australia. I'm just saying Indonesia's huge. So Jakarta, nighttime population of 5 million. Daytime population of 10 million. Mathematically, that means that every morning 5 million people commute in, and every evening 5 million commute out. Are you with me still? That means the roads are pretty busy. You can sometimes take an hour to go a kilometer. Perhaps shouldn't add this, but every car tends to have plastic contraptions. There's a male version and a female version to relieve yourself if you're bursting to go. And you might think, well, that's a bit over the top. Why wouldn't you just get out of the car and walk and go to the restroom at the office? Because 2 of those 5 million commuters, they aren't in cars. It's too much. So they're going down the footpaths or the pavement too and getting through. It's just crowded. So in that context, if you're the director of a company in a high-rise in downtown, the ride to the airport with no traffic is about 45 minutes. But with 5 million people coming in and 5 million going out, it can take 4 to 6 hours to get to the airport. So we had a building there. It was about 10,000 square meters. What we did is we spent our $20 on a pail of paint and a brush. And we went onto the roof of the building and painted a big white circle, and then we painted the letter H in the middle. And we created what? A helipad. And now the directors could get to the airport in 20 minutes, and the value of the rental space went up by close to $20 a square meter. Times 10,000 square meters is an extra $200,000 a year. Are you with me? Not all together now, folks. An extra $200,000 divided by a cap rate of 10% is worth $2 million extra. Boom. Now, admittedly, we also had to get CAA, Civil Aviation Authority approval, which involved a few dinners and all that sort of thing, and a helicopter ride. But are you starting to get the idea of how simple this is? And you might think, as we say in the Netherlands, that's the far from my bed show, like it's not going to happen here. How far do you think you'd have to walk to come across a helipad? There's one not 20 feet from here. So again, you can make things happen, you can watch things happen, or you can wonder what happened. You can say, oh, these stories are all fanciful stories to tell a good yarn, but they're not really practical for South Africa. Or you can say, you know, maybe there's some truth to them. Instead of saying, I can't afford it, you should always say, how can I afford it? Instead of saying, that sounds too fanciful, when am I going to have a helipad? Say, you know what, I should figure out a way of deploying a helipad so that I'll actually benefit, and I'll benefit my tenants, and the banker will benefit, and everyone will benefit. And there's that much less congestion on the roads because you're up in the air. Does this make sense? Right, so another area that I find interesting, and I don't know if that will apply here, but I'll flick through some photos because you're sick of listening to me for a while. So there are more products and Japanese stuff. That's neither here nor there. So let's talk about how people live in compressed spaces. You know, we have apartments on top of each other. You think that's busy? Here's one in Hong Kong where they're jam-packed. And this is actually on Nathan Road. This was photographed from the Hyatt Hotel. And for those of you who know, Nathan Road is a very upmarket shopping street with fancy stores. But up above, that's still what it's like. So we fit ourselves into small areas. Why do they live like this instead of having the proverbial quarter-acre section or lot or piece of land or block?
No space.
They've run out of space. So we stack things up when we're low on space. So here we stack tombs and graves up. Why do we do that? Well, this one is in Saint-Tropez, low on space. Land is extraordinarily expensive there. But in other parts of the world, like in New Orleans, you also stack them up above ground. Not so much because of the shortage of space, but because it's on swamp territory. If you bury bodies underground, it seems to be okay for the first 3 months or so, but then Aunt Agatha pops up 2 kilometers away, you know. It's true. It's horrid. But more to the point with real estate, notice this is a car parking system. Do you call them car parks? Yes. Okay, car parking, where it's hydraulically lifted. So here you've got 4 cars that can stack on top of each other. Nothing wrong with it. But if there's a car underneath here and this guy wants to leave, obviously you have to remove the first one, then bring it down, that one too. It's quite an operation, right? So that's just another system they've got though. And here's another variation. These are in New York. Nothing right or wrong. But with parking costing $30 an hour, you know, it's worth putting one of these systems in. And they're everywhere. Here's a company that makes them, and you can find these on the internet. We've seen hydraulic lifts. You've all been familiar with these. Why do we put our car on a hydraulic lift? Sometimes it's mechanical, sometimes they're a combination. Why do we do that? So that a mechanic can work on the car. I figured out a way of speeding this up. I'm going to answer some of my own questions. It's cool. So, and here's the idea. Now, some people think, well, thank God I only need one of those if something happens to my car, right? But why not think laterally and deploy it elsewhere? Here's a private guy. He's got quite a collection of sports cars, and he ran out of space. Instead of building a bigger garage, you might as well just pop it up. And there are many variants. Jeep, which is quite tall, but it's 2 sport cars fit in the slot of 1 car. Here's one. Can you see what's going on here? I'm on the left screen with my pointer. You can drive on that and the whole thing goes down. It's like a 2-story thing. And if you think, well, that's the only one of those. No, there are plenty. Here's a guy who keeps his Porsche underground. It helps with stopping thieves driving away with it. It keeps your yard bigger than it otherwise would be. It keeps the sun and the rain off your Porsche. I mean, that's pretty cool, isn't it? Here's another one, if you think that's the only one. Underground parking for his cars. Is this cool? Yes. I love this house. Dinky little house. He's got an Audi and a gull-wing Mercedes. Oops, where is it? Wrong button. There we go. And, you know, a little apartment, but he can keep his 2 cars there. This is a system in Japan, and I'll show you that. They have this revolving, it's like a paternoster elevator, where they stack the cars up. So you drive in, get out of the car, and it stacks it up on top of each other. I've got a little video clip of this, I think. So there's one. You can see it more here. You drive in. Do you see what I'm saying? And then you can get a lot of cars in a relatively small space. Now, these things aren't cheap. They might cost $500,000 to put in. But if by having a 26-car car park instead of a 2-car car park, which is all you'd fit in there, if you can get another, you know, $20 a square meter times X square meters, it might pay for that $500,000 structure in the first 6 months. So you've got to do the numbers. And there you can see the cars coming down. And then when the guy's ready to leave, he gets in his car. Very simple idea. And then you'll see the circular thing here. You'll see what that does, because he's going to back out of the car once we get there. Is this sort of interesting? It's different? Right, very interesting. Here's another one. I just want to expand your mind. Now, out in the country, you won't be able to deploy this, but in downtown Joburg or Pretoria, there might just be one building that's not viable on its own, but by putting these things in, they will be viable. He's basically saying, keep going, you slowpoke, you're driving too slowly, you're clear, there's nothing in your way, keep going. And they're spinning on that little rotational thing so that you don't need a big turning bay to turn. All right, so that's that one. Look at this is a Volkswagen system where they've got these elevators where the car whips up. They've got hundreds of car parks here, all automated. Is that cool? I think it's great. Look at this one. I think this one's fun. Fortunately, it's sped up. Who said they wanted to speed up? Well, IJ said he wanted to speed up this thing. Is that cool? Is this expanding your mind a bit? Where, you know, if you can figure out ways of getting more cars in, you can get more for the residential or commercial. I think it's cool. And this one is the ultimate. I mean, I'll show you this too. You want to see another video? Here we go. Are you filming the video? Because otherwise we'll turn the lights off. But otherwise we'll leave it on. I don't mind. So is that a fancy car? This is on Scott's Road in Singapore. Who's been to Singapore? A few of you, okay. So he's going to park his car. Similar thing, right? There's a garage door to a garage door. I forget where I am now. I'm multilingual in English too. Nice car? Fingerprint reader. Yeah, it's a bit hard to see with the lights on the screen, but I think you get the general idea. All automated, right? You don't have to do a thing. So it's picking them up from the basement.
Yeah.
It's different, huh? Pretty cool. And that's him just leaving in the morning. All right, I think we've seen that. This, I said I'd show it to you. This is the funeral parlor building. It's not glamorous. But I don't go for commercial buildings that look beautiful. To me, the beauty is in the balance sheet. The beauty is in the books. The beauty is in the cash flow. And if you want to buy a big 40-story glass tower that will impress people, then generally they aren't that lucrative because people will pay silly money for them to show off their ego. So I think this is quite an ugly building. but it's double story, triple brick, 4 double bedrooms. You know, it's been a great cash cow all along. Does that make sense? So, Scott, I don't know if you still want to analyze some of these things, or we do that afterwards.
No, definitely. Please.
Okay, well then, what we've got is I'll quit this thing, and we'll leave our keynote altogether. And now I'll call up something else, and I forget where it is. Oracle VirtualBox. Here's. All right, so here we've got Windows, and I'll start it from scratch, because here we've got a Windows program running, and then we've got a software REAP. Does anyone have REAP here? REAP. It stands for Real Estate Acquisition. One person. All right, well then, 2 people. Cool. Well, sing out if I'm saying something wrong, or if I'm stretching the limits of credibility or whatever. But REAP was designed for one purpose only, and that is put in all the specifics on a property to see whether or not it's a good deal from your perspective. Would you agree that an investment that is great for you may not suit me, and one that's great for me may not suit you? There could be overlap, maybe not. Everyone has different levels of cash in the bank, credit worthiness, cash flow requirements and all that. So some investments have high yield but low capital growth. Others have high capital growth but low yield. So the idea of REAP is to take all the facts and figures on a property and decide for you, should I buy this or should I not buy it? And let's say you've got 2 properties, a residential house costing $240,000 with all these numbers, and a commercial property costing $350,000 with different numbers. It's not just should I buy them, yes or no. What if you could only buy one of the 2? Then it helps you decide which one should I buy. And the way you should look at it is not just what is REAP worth to me if it would help me buy just one great property. You've also got to figure out what is it worth to you if it could help you avoid buying just one lemon. Is that fair comment? Here's the real kicker, and I find this is kind of exciting. If it's a good property, it'll show it to be a good property. But if it's a lousy property, it'll show it to be a lousy property. And do we want to reveal that it's a lousy property if it is? Yes, right? So we take no prisoners, because at the end of it, as they say, it's not who's right, it's what's right. What's the right thing here? Make sense? So which one are we going to do? We're going to do commercial or residential first?
Let's do residential stuff.
So we have time for both. And what are we going to call it? Is this like Atlanta or something?
11211 Glenridge Drive. Everyone's actually got the piece of paper with the numbers.
All right, Glenridge Drive, I don't know if it's that way. And is it RJ as the contact person? And contact phone, contact email, all that sort of thing. So you can put the address in here. You can put notes in here. There's an unlimited number of notes that you can put in this field here. And then we can add photos. If we'd really colluded on this, Scott, I would have asked for some photos of it, loaded it on this Windows machine, and we could have imported them now to show that we can put these photos in there.
We're not that organized.
We're not that organized. No, I think we're doing pretty well given when we got here and all that. Okay, all right. So I've gone from the general screen to the financial. This is one screen, folks. Listen up. This is one screen where you put in all the details of the property. It'll seem like a long, arduous process in the beginning, but it takes about 60 seconds when you know the system. I'm going to go through it a bit more slowly so that you can all follow. Now, I know some of you don't like numbers. Your eyes glaze over. You can nod off, which I could nod off. I've still got the jet lag. I arrived in, you know, there's a coup going on in Thailand right now, right? The army's taken over. I arrived in Thailand once. It's a 17-hour flight from LA. And I was resting in my hotel and I heard this shaking. I thought, oh no, not another earthquake. And I looked out the window and there were tanks rolling by. That was what was causing the shaking. And on this tank was a young kid. He was probably 21, but he looked 17. And as I caught his eye, he caught my eye, and he had an AK-47 pointed towards me. And in that instant, I discovered a cure for jet lag. All right, so the first thing we do is we've got to figure out the purchase price. What is the purchase price?
153. 153,000.
53,000. So we've got that in. Then we go to market value. Why do we have a difference? Because if you know you're buying it at a true discount to market, it's really worth 200 and you're picking it up for 180. You want to know that. You may not know that here. You may, Scott. I don't know what it's worth. Do you know? Is IJ here?
Well, no, I'll tell you what's very interesting, and specifically in Atlanta, is that for me, I don't really care what the prices were in 2007. But what's quite a good indication of intrinsic value is what the replacement cost would be. And so what you're looking at in Atlanta is somewhere between $90 and $100 per square foot. This particular property is 1,997 square feet. So you'd be looking at to rebuild that from scratch without buying the land, somewhere between $180,000 and $200,000.
Okay, but we may not rebuild it. Another criterion is if we bought it for 153, what could we sell it for next week or the week after without doing anything to it? And if we could sell it for 180, then its market value is 180. If it was sit on the market for 6 months of that, then it's not worth 180, no matter what the replacement value is.
Yep.
So we can leave that at 153, or if you think it's at a good...
Generally, you're looking because he's getting them at,
A discount, right?
At discounts, yeah. So, I mean...
So should we be conservative for 173?
160 or 173. Yeah.
What do you want, folks?
160.
160, okay, 160,000. So there we are. So we've got the building value now. You cannot depreciate here, but in the States you can. And generally, for small properties like this, about 25% of the purchase price is represented by land, which you cannot depreciate, and the remaining 75% is buildings and contents, or chattels, or permanent fixtures, carpets, cutlery, crockery, whatever might come with it. So we're just making that assumption. If you know what the land value is worth relative to the building value from the tax records, you can put the exact number in. Otherwise, we're going to assume it's 75% building, which you can depreciate. Closing costs. Now, these are just estimates. We heard in Florida and New Jersey and New York, they're about 2,000. In Atlanta, they're about 100. But we've got closing costs, escrow fees, title
with all
insurance.
that stuff, we put in about, call it conservatively, $2,000.
All right, so we put in 2,000
Just in
there.
my interest, in America, there are no transfer fees. Well, not like we know transfer fees.
Right. So notice we've got a purchase price of 153 and closing costs of 2,000. So our total cost so far is 155,000. So now we look at the investor. How much cash are we putting into the deal? That's important, isn't it? Because you could put all cash in and then your returns are just rent divided by purchase price. But if you're borrowing money, we now need to know what's the interest rate, what's the amortization rate, all that sort of thing.
Let's go simply at the moment 50-50. So let's put in $78,000.
All right, 78,000 cash that we're putting in. And here the software is asking for the taxable income. I don't want to know your taxable income. This is the taxable income of the entity buying the property. If you're buying it in your own name, which I personally wouldn't recommend, then you'd put your own income in there. But if you're buying it under the name of an LLC, we'd put the LLC's income in there because we've got a graduated tax scale you do here too, etc., etc. So let's just put, 50,000, say. It's going to vary depending on who you are, but the software takes all of this into account. Now we've got the rental information. You've got weekly rent, in some places it's monthly rent, and in some places it's yearly rent, like on commercial. It's America, so it's probably going to be monthly rent.
Yeah, we monthly is $1,300.
1,300. So $1,300 a month. We've got a vacancy rate that we put in here. Notice if you were to do calculations on the back of an envelope or using a calculator, you might get 9 out of 10 of these factors, but you'll always forget one. And the one you forget will differ each time. So, 4% vacancy rate, do you work on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think from 4%, I think it's good, but also it is one thing that's taken into account. They do have 3-year leases. So rather than having a problem every 12 months.
Right.
So, but it's conservative.
Well, then we should
4%,
probably put less in. So, if you've got 3-year leases, put in 2%. But here's the point, you can vary it, and we will later on. So your annual rent is now $15,288, no more, no less. Management fees, if you've got it under management, that's where you'd put that in. By the way, you can put it in as a percentage or as an actual dollar amount. We're spending $800 a year management, or 6.25% of the rent roll, whatever.
10%.
10%. So here it's 10%. We put that in and we keep going. Notice the management fee now is $1,528, which is exactly 10% of the rental income, $15,288. Okay. So now we've got renovations and special expenses. There are 2 categories because it depends on whether you capitalize them or depreciate them. It's a fine point, but the software allows for that. Are we putting extra money into this, Scott, at that price?
So the beauty with RJ is it's turnkey. So rather than buying something on a website, you don't know what you're doing, it's fully, as he showed you already, you know exactly what you're getting. It's turnkey, it's rent ready, so there's no extra expenses, you know exactly what you're dealing with. Another thing that most of you don't know about, but in America, the debts or the liens stay with the property. So unless you've got a very good attorney that knows how to clear the liens, you might find about a whole lot of surprises you didn't plan for. All the liens are completely clear, the title is clean. So to come back to your question, Dolf, there is no extra surprises, no extra expenses.
Perfect.
It's a completely rent-ready property.
That makes it. So we've done one of the 3 columns already, and I think you'll agree that if you're familiar with this, you can boop, it's done in no time. So now we go to the middle column. Under loans, you can put in 4 separate loans on this property, like concurrent loans. But the loans you get, are they normally P&I or interest only, Scott?
Interest and capital?
Pardon? Interest and capital, P&I. You call it interest and capital here?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we call it principal and interest. There you go. It's already worked out what it is. It's the purchase price, 153, plus your costs minus your cash input. So there it is. And what's the term? 20?
20, yep.
So we'll put in 20 here. So now it's worked that. And now you can do all these things. We can just guess the whole amount. We can do each one. If you like. There's an appraisal fee. You need a valuation done. So that's going to be either a percentage of the loan or a fixed cost.
It's a fixed cost of, well, it's 4% of one-off cost for the whole thing. So
4% of the mortgage amount?
Yeah. So that all of them put together is 4%.
Oh, the whole lot. So we'll just put 4% in there, and that accounts for everything. Are you with me? Yeah. Okay. So now we've got the rate. What is the rate on the mortgage?
12%.
12%. All right. So we go here, 12%. And additional repayments, if you decide to make extra payments, I don't know why you would, because what do you do when you've made your last mortgage payment to the bank? They ring you up and say, that was fun, would you like another mortgage? Do you want to refinance? So why pay them off when you know that principal repayments or capital repayments are not tax deductible? When all you're going to do when you've paid the loan off is borrow it all back again. So anyway, we're not going to put any of those in. And then we've got the tax rate here. These are standard tax rates in the States. It'll depend on the entity and the combination of federal and state tax, but you can tweak all of that to suit your tax. You can change the rates. You can add bands and all that sort of thing. And then we've got capital growth. You can decide what capital growth you want to put in there. It's got 5% at the moment. You might think that's good, but you may think it's not enough.
I think to be honest, you know, you mentioned the long-term average is 9.75, and because the properties are being bought at a discount, it's probably more accurate to go 9.75. I mean, last year alone was 16%, but I don't like looking backwards. You know?
Well, we'll put 9.7 in, and now we've got annual expenses. These are the costs here. We're onto the third column already. So we've got other expenses here. Let's go back up top. I don't know what up here. So we've got body corporate or cleaning, HOA, which stands for homeowners insurance. Homeowners association fees. You've got insurance premiums, letting fees, maintenance, mowing, other expenses, pest control, property taxes. And by the way, these are just the ones that appear by default, but every one of these windows has a little...
add one just to prove you can.
Well, I'm about
there's
to
a
do that.
pool maintenance fee for $60.
All right, so I'm going to put in here pool maintenance, and as soon as I hit the tab, it's going to put it in alphabetical order, I think, or well, by the time we hit refresh. So pool maintenance, and here I'm going to add another one, and I'm going to call it the SA Special Levy. I don't know what that is, but just to show that it can go in there. And there it is. So it's put them in alphabetical order, and you say this one is $60 a year?
60. And per month.
Oh, so on an annual basis, that would be times 12 is $720, right? Somehow I got into pool maintenance. All right, so 720. It doesn't matter because it would have ended up the same number, but that one. Okay, so there we go. And how come I've got double that now? I must have it in there somewhere else. Oh, it's sorted. All right, it's updated it. Okay. Rates, do you know what they would be, or property taxes?
Yeah, I got them here. For the year, it's 964.
964. Okay, so that's in there. And, you know, we can aggregate the others and just add them in as one amount. Do you know what other expenses there are?
Insurance, 518.
518. Okay, that's it. 580?
No, 518, 518, yep.
518. Okay, well, there we go. Now, here's depreciation. Depreciation is something you don't get to deal with. It's actually quite a lot of fun because it's the thing that makes you able to have positive cash flow coming out of a building. So in reality, you're earning money after you've paid all for your cash expenses, real expenses. But by the time you settle up with the tax man, they believe you're running it at a loss. And it's legal. You're making money and putting it in the bank. But by the time you settle up with the tax man, because you can claim depreciation, on paper, it looks as though you're running at a loss. And they subsidize that loss. They say, you poor thing, you're running at a loss on paper. So we're going to give you money. Is that cool? I think it's hot. So I love depreciation. That's another reason why it's kind of cool over there. So usually about 6% of the purchase price can be depreciated. So 6% of 150 is about $9,000. You can separate it item by item, and some items have different amounts. I'm going to put in a $9,000 dishwasher. Okay, there we go. So that's the depreciation on it. And then we've got inflation rate. That is the rate at which your rent will go up and other expenses will go up, your pool maintenance fee and your rates and that. You know, it's going to be closer. If your capital growth is 9.7, let's bump that up a bit to 8% or something. And then stamp duty, we don't have stamp duty here, do we? So it's at 0%. So we've now loaded this property with all the details we need. And bear with me, because the next page is going to be quite number-centric. Here's the report summary, where we've got year 1, year 2, year 3. Do you want me to point with my mouse pointer, which is on both screens, or with my laser pointer, which will be on one screen? The mouse, okay. So here we've got year 1 to 5. By the way, in the screen, the main screen, you might have seen you can change which years you see. You can see years 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, or 1, 2, 3, 10, 40, whatever you want. So we put nothing in for renovations, didn't need any. We've got capital growth of 9.7%. We fixed that, so that's it. So the property value at the end of the first year, it's gone up by 9.7% from 153 to 175. It goes 192, on and on it goes. The loan amount, it started, well, by the end of the first year, we've paid a small amount of capital off. It's down to 76, 12, 14, then 74, 73, 72, 70. Your equity has gone from 99 to 117 to 137. You following me? We said inflation's 8% all the way through. Your gross rent goes up with that inflation. Your principal repayments are going up. Your interest rate, we said, stays the same at 12. Your loan interest, there's the amount of loan interest. Additional repayments, we didn't have any. Total loan payments, this is P and I, or P and C for capital, I guess. No, C and I, capital and interest. We had no special expenses. Here are your total property expenses. They're slowly going up over time, as we would expect them to. But we've now got pre-tax cash flow. It's positive already. This is before we settle up with the taxman. The pre-tax cash flow is $1,300. So let me ask you a question, quick tangent. If you have any other business where at the end of the year, after paying all your cash expenses, you end up with $1,300, by the time you settle up with the taxman, would you expect more or less than $1,300? Less. Well, look at this. Here is our $1,300, but we've got pre-tax cash on cash of only 1.71%, but the depreciation on the building is $3,200. We can claim an expense of $3,200 even though we didn't pay it. And depreciation on the contents is $1,800, total deductions of $2,100. We get a tax credit, what I talked about 2 seconds ago, from the taxman of $1,400. Our after-tax cash flow has gone from $1,300 to $2,800. You should be jumping out of your chairs. I am. I think that's hot. So your after-tax cash and cash is 3.4. Your income per month is 234. Here's
but just very important. That's very important. If you look there per month, it's cash flow positive from day one. Something that in South Africa is supposedly this hoodoo land you can't find. But yeah.
So here's the internal rate of return. I just want to spend 30 seconds on it. No one understands what an internal rate of return is. Any accountants in the room willing to admit it? All right. An internal rate of return is the return that you would get such that if you took the net present value of a future series of cash flows and equated it to the interest rate that you would pay in the market today, you would get an equivalence there. Is that correct or not? He couldn't even say yes or no, but he was nodding his head, saying that's essentially it over the initial investment. I'm not being mean. It's hard to understand for people in the know, right? Let alone for the masses. Here's another way of looking at the internal rate of return. We are putting how much into this building? 77 or 78,000 cash, right? Yep. And after all is said and done, by the time we've paid tax at the end of year 1, we're pulling out 2,800, and year 2, 2,600, 3,200, 3,900, and 4,700. And at the end of year 5, our equity, what we own in this property, has gone up to 183,000. The internal rate of return is the return that a bank would have to give you, such that if you gave a bank the same 77,000, they could afford to give you 2,800 in year 1 and whatever the numbers are for the remainder of those years, and at the end of 5 years give you 185,000. To do that, they would have to be offering you an internal rate of 27%. Can you get that anywhere else? I find that hot. So partially you're getting cash flow positive return, the $1,300. It's cash flow positive from day one. Then when you settle up with the tax man, it's even more cash flow positive. And concurrent with all that happening, it's going up in capital value, and you're getting the benefit of that. It's 3 forms of return that you're getting. So this is all very number-centric. We're nearly done, folks. We're now going to generate the report. And there it is there. We'll go to fit to width, and we'll go to the next page because that's just numbers. And there's the same sheet we just looked at, but now let's look, and there's the loan. It's a single loan. But who pays the interest bill? Do you pay it? No, the tenant pays all of your mortgage interest and all of your mortgage repayments. The tenant's funding this entire thing. Do you follow what I'm saying? It's not as if you have to subsidize. There's none of this silly negative equity or negative gearing or whatever. So that's the first page we'll look at. Here's the second one. Look at the value and debt. The debt of this property is slowly going down. Why is it slowly going down? Because we're on a 20-year amortization period. At the end of 20 years, we would have paid off the... But the value of the property is going up. Right? Is that cool? I think it is. Here's the cash flow scenario. We're putting in $77,000. In year one, as we saw, pre-tax, which is yellow, and post-tax, which is bluey, purpley, call it blue, they're cash flow positive. That's hot. You're pulling money out from day one. That's really cool. What's this one here? This is called the cash... this is property versus cash. So let's assume you've got that $77,000. You now have a choice of putting it in this property with only, what was it, 1.71% return pre-tax. It wasn't very high, was it? And something like 3.4% after tax. Or putting it in the bank. If you put it in the bank at some ridiculous rate, whatever the rate is for money in the bank, it doesn't grow at all hardly. It goes down with inflation. But in this property, look at how fast it grows. It grows because you've got leverage. Sure, you're only putting 77 in, but you're buying a $53,000 property that was worth 160 on day one. That first year's growth of 9.7% wasn't on 153 purchase price, it was on the 160 value. You with me? All right, and then we've got, I think, one of the last graphs. And this is the REAP index. This is an indicator index. It's got a REAP index of 5, it's got an income index of 7, and a growth index of 54. What dimensions are they in? Is it kilometers per wasping per... What? No, they're dimensionless. It's just a number. Of itself, it's meaningless. But you can now compare 2 properties with each other. What's the REAP index on this one versus another one? It's got an overall REAP index of 18. Again, that's neither here nor there. But by the time you've analyzed 3, if one comes up with an index of 18 and the other one's got 26, which is likely to be the better deal for you? And you won't know, because even though you're not going to live in that house, you kind of didn't like that khaki brown carpet. It looked like baboon poop. But anyway, you've got these emotional reasons why you don't like it. But they may not stand up to financial scrutiny.
Dolf, can I ask you just quickly, if you wouldn't mind, I just want to show 3 quick changes that I think would be really relevant to people to explain the type of stuff. So just importantly, sorry, if you just go back to that IRR that you showed.
Oh, all right. Back to the report?
Yeah. So you see that number there is 21.44, yeah? In terms of the IRR after 5 years.
Yes.
Okay, who's going to remember that number for me? I need one person.
Here, down here.
Yeah, who's going to, do you remember? 21.44. Okay, so if we can just go back to the analysis quickly, the inputting.
Okay.
Okay, so just very quickly. So when we started out in America, we couldn't get any financing whatsoever. You had to buy everything cash. What we managed to do was we managed to get private financing at 12%. It's quite expensive money. It's called hard money. That's how that house has been bought. But at least you get started and you build a credit rating. We're in the process of building credit ratings for clients. So we've got a gentleman at the moment, RJ already referred to him. So if we can change the loan to value, you said that we were putting in 75, or there, where's your thing in terms of the
Sorry,
cash investment?
Oh, that's here?
Yeah. So let's change that to 40. Because at a minimum we can actually get his loan to value as high as 80%, but let's say that it's at 75%. Let's go to the interest rate at 6%. Okay, and most importantly, the capital growth rate, you added 9.7%. If you want to compare an apple with an apple, which I'm sure you are, because now you're trying to decide, should I buy in Johannesburg or should I buy in Atlanta? Well, we've looked at the facts already. The rand is devaluing by 6% a year on year for the last 30 years. So what if you really want to compare an apple with an apple, comparing Joburg and Atlanta, the best way to do that is to change that capital growth rate by the 6%. So I'd make it roughly 15%, just in simple terms.
All right, well, here was the internal rate when we did it the first time. Now with these changes, we've gone from, we'll get rid of that, we've gone from 27.14 down or up to 80.21.
And I mean, just to put that in perspective, this is real life. I mean, this is exactly what we're doing. I mean, one gentleman started with us in February last year. He bought 4 houses cash. We managed to get him private financing. He's taken that now to 8 properties on the 12%. And within a year, he's going to be able to double it again, because now he's going to drop to the 6% financing fixed over 15 years. He's 58 years old. By the time he's 73, his kids will have 14 houses paid for, free and clear in America. And if you go back to what RJ said, even with no rent growth whatsoever, that'll be $14,000 a month passive income after all expenses.
Scott, why don't you change the inflation to 4% or 5%?
Yeah.
Well, remember, inflation is the rate at which rents go up, but also costs, pool maintenance, insurance, property taxes, all those other things. So we can, if we go to 5%, my prediction is it won't make much difference at all, but we'll see. Yeah, so now it went free, it hasn't changed it hardly at all, 8.2 and 8.21. We can make our rate, we'll go back to 12. And now we'll see what effect that has. If our interest rate goes up to 12, we've gone from an 80.21% IRR down to 59. You know, we can go back to, well, that was closer to 80,000. You'll see that it brings it down again. And then we changed one other thing. We had this at 9.7, and we should get close to where we were before. There's that 27.31. So all I'm doing now is I'm changing them one by one. Let's say we only put 40,000 cash in. When we only put 40,000 cash in, we have to borrow 40,000 more, would you agree? And we're paying interest on that, so you'd expect our returns to go down, true or not? The accountant can tell us why not. The returns aren't going down because previously we were getting that internal rate of return of 27.13% on our approximately $80,000 investment. But now we're getting slightly less cash because we're paying more interest because we've borrowed 40 more. But we're getting that slightly less cash on only half the capital invested. It makes a huge difference. And you know, one of the things I'd encourage you to do as you get more liquid is to just put in less and less cash. So anyway, 40,000, we put that in and you see it slowly goes back up again. And we put in 6%, if you can get the 6%, we go there. And then the other one was, I forget what it was, doesn't matter.
It was the capital growth back to 15.
Oh yeah, capital growth. If we make that 15 again, then you know, there you are. We're back up to 80.21. And you can look at the report again and see how each figure is affected.
But also, now, look at the cash flow there. It's still cash flow positive. Because South Africans don't like to send $1 overseas. So it's
because
important.
now, see, your pre-tax cash flow was 1,300 before, it's gone down to 1,200. But your after-tax cash flow has gone to, it's down at 2,500, but we're getting a much higher internal rate of return. So anyway, the software enables you to do that. You can print these reports in one fell swoop, you can email them, you can PDF them, whatever. If you're applying for your own funding, you can take them to the bank manager. If you're showing your accountant what's going on, you can give them those. Or you just use it yourself to say, should I do this or not? But it takes the mystery out of it, and it takes the vagaries out of it. And you'll never wonder, did I forget something? Because there are so many things in there.
I mean, I think just guys, I mean, we could do this, and obviously there's the different deals and we can do it, but I think, you know, people have got a good essence. Can we agree that if your investment committee is sitting there and punching in these numbers, and not only using this system, but the 9 other systems we have, which to be honest, which is really, really exciting, is that we're going to amalgamate all 10 of these into one back end behind the system you saw at lunchtime. Do you think that we can help make better decisions in terms of what we're doing rather than gut feel, yes or no? Yes. All right, so can I have a round of applause for Dolf for sharing
Thank you,
his
guys. Thank you.
system,
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dolf. So ladies and gentlemen, that was hopefully very valuable. And the only thing I would say with the system is that no one system is necessarily better or worse than over another system. The only thing you really need is a system. Who here has at least even a spreadsheet to be able to buy and decide which property they should invest on over another one? Anyone else? Who here has heard Clem Santa speak in terms of, he talks about the scenarios for South Africa? Who's heard him speak? Who's heard him speak twice? Who here has built a 4-dimensional model to take what he teaches you and to be able to make the right decisions? So just like what Dolf said, I'd highly recommend that rather than just making gut feel as to where you should be investing in South Africa or out of South Africa, whether you should be investing in America or London or Australia, we've got it all in here. 16 different countries are analyzed, every single one, whether it's good to get a passport or not, whether there's pros or cons. The bottom line of what we're trying to impress upon you is that with the partnership model, we all bring a huge amount of skill sets to the table, and what we want to share with you is that you will have access to that. And literally what Neil was talking about this morning with the digital online medium, we want to take all of this, when it's over 1 million lines of code, and rather than it being sitting on my desktop, I want it sitting in the World Wide Web, in the cloud, so that I can access it and do the techniques. And then you guys, as partners, would be able to analyze the deals and look at all the due diligence we're doing and every step of the way.